Welcome to another installment of What Made Them Great, a design challenge comparing Arthur Franz's Breakaway Football and our favorite APBA Football. And today's topic, the 1992 Oilers, or as Arthur calls them, the Gunslingers. The Houston Heartbreakers, of course, the comeback. Who can forget it? This Houston franchise was in the middle of a 7 playoff appearance string, all losses. They never got past the divisional round. If you look back at their media guide, you'll see that there's a lot of talk about the run and shoot and the Fab Four receiving core that Warren Moon used to incredible effect. If you look at the Pro Football Researchers Association's game books, they actually listed the receivers with the codes XR, HR, YR, and ZR. It's truly a new era in football. If you talk about defining years like the 1978 season, now we're seeing the passing game really opening up. In Cincinnati in 1988, you've got no huddle offense. And in the early 90s, you've got the K gun. Jerry Glanville and his Oilers, and later they became Jack Pardee Oilers, really opened the field up. What was the ultimate deciding factor for you to card the Gunslingers?
It was the loss. It was the big loss to the Bills. That comeback win. You can't not have that team. And I feel bad. Look, I wasn't an Oilers fan growing up. I feel so bad for Oilers fans, like a kindred spirit now, because of being a Saints fan for so long, we didn't even sniff the playoffs, right? So at least the Oilers had the playoffs, but maybe sometimes if you get close and then you're always failing, it's that whole Tantalus myth that you just can never reach the fruit at the edge of the tree. It's constantly being pulled back. So that influenced the design of the Gunslingers. We definitely built in that sort of poison pill, is what we end up calling it, that helps them perform the way that history had them perform.
It's a really curious team. I looked at a highlight film that called the 92 Oilers the greatest show on turf. And there's some myths to bust here because they really did only finish 10-6 for all that four wide receiver prowess. They had a pretty strong defense. The media guide says they ranked third overall. Pro Football Reference terms it a little differently. They weren't all passing because you had Lorenzo White with 1,200 yards rushing, fourth leading receiver in the four wide set. They also weren't blowing teams away. They gave up 4 fourth-quarter leads, according to one of the graphics in the comeback game. They lost a 3-pointer to the Dolphins, a 2-pointer to the Packers. They had a relatively weak schedule. They only scored 30 points one other time in the season, 38-point to a 24-point win over the Bengals. So in APBA world, we say they're carded like a 10-6 team. They're good, but they're not great. They're kind of middling. How do you capture that?
So I think, that's a great analysis, and to think about why that team was underperforming, I think injuries played a huge factor. That team had been together for a long time, and I really want to talk about their style of offense and sort of how that matched up against defenses. So we'll get into that in a moment. But they were getting up there in age. I think they were just cresting past their prime at that point. Um, which typically you would see like veteran savvy kind of come into play, and they would be able to overcome these things, which I think did happen on occasion because they did win some close games, but they also lost some close games. But the real hallmark of that team is that they were really never out of it. There's only one game, I think, in the regular season where they were just not able to sort of be in the running in the fourth quarter, So that was the hallmark of that team. And that's why we chose to go with Here We Go Again, that mechanism that really throttles, their effectiveness when they're winning, but takes the shackles off when they're losing. And it creates this really interesting, I don't know if you've ever driven like a U-Haul truck, and it has that governor on it where you can only go like 65, 66. And if you really lay on it, it'll, take the gas out of it and it'll back you back down. That's how I view that team. They just, they're a weird, oddity, but it was injuries. So Moon was hurt. They were playing the commander, Cody Carlson, for a while, and he showed up. He played well, but they had other key injuries that really kind of slowed them down. And one thing that I had forgotten, because this was 30 years ago, my memory when I was designing the Gunslingers, my memory of the Oilers was as kind of a down the field, big vertical offense. And that's not really what they did. They were really more of kind of, the West Coast kind of run and shoot crossing routes. They were good at deep ends. They'd find space in zones. And Warren Moon is such a tremendous talent and such a smart quarterback with a great arm. And I can't say enough good things about him. when he's healthy, right? Because he got hurt that year. Again, not his fault, but he did. But that's how they were chewing up lots of yardage. And you've got even down to Kevin Gilbride, their offensive coordinator, was actually out for like 1 or 2 games because he was recovering from cancer surgery. Like this team couldn't catch a break. So the fact that they made the playoffs at all was sort of a miracle, or minor miracle. And then they were up 32 points that they were up. Was it like 35-3 at one point? Oh my God, I still can't believe they lost it.
The thing about APBA cards is that they give players points and you add up their points to get a total on offense and a total on defense to a maximum of 55. When you look at these teams, there are 39 offense, there are 38 defense. It's not as bad a disparity as, say, the 81 Chargers, where it was 48 offense and 32 defense, massive gap. But as you mentioned, the age, outside of Munchak and Matthews on that O line, they're 31 and 32 years old, and the rest of the O line's kind of 2.3 point guys. So, and the linebacking core outside of their middle linebacker, and their secondary, they've got some gaps there. It's kind of like a will to win, with a lot of power that they could have maybe even unleashed more had they maybe been even a little less conservative. Who knows?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if you take that talent in its form and transport it into 2024 and give them a playbook that is common now, they're going to be better. A lot of this is around the genesis of this passing attack. And, so again, when I went back and they were a big screen team, so I wasn't really aware of that. They were a huge screen team. And so one of the things that we do in Breakaway Football, zone blows up a screen. So if you call a zone and the offense calls a screen, it's a defensive breakaway, you can't do it. And so zone becomes very dangerous because it doesn't get beat by a lot of things. Many teams have very good values on their zone. So it's an easy, safe thing to call. And that would really blunt this team probably too much, in my opinion. And that's why we gave the Gunslingers the man in motion capability. So the man in motion is once per drive, they can say, okay, I'm putting a guy in motion, and it forces the defense to actually identify whether they're in man or zone. And so that way you can spot on a critical down, you can catch your opponent in the zone. What that means is that if I call the zone, and you go man in motion on me, I have to flip it over and show it to you. So now you know what the values are, and you get a chance to audible. And the other thing that's really cool about the deck construction is that we have complementary plays that work really well. So in high pressure situations, when you think, okay, they're probably going to go zone here, I've got my man in motion in the back pocket so I can guarantee that I know. And I'm going to call a play that has screen on one side and draw on the other, because a draw play blows up a zone. So I can use my man in motion, catch you in a zone, audible to that draw, and now I've got an offensive breakaway. So the construction of their playbook is intentionally complementary to make it easy to generate breakaways and really get things going if people lean too hard on their zone plays. And that's why that offense is so deadly in breakaway football. They also have unlike most other teams, they have minimum gains not only on their short passes, but also on their medium passes. So a lot of their passing is just flat out more effective, but it's not higher value necessarily. They're not taking the top off the defense unless you're catching them in the right look. So they're really good at kind of working the ball down the field, getting those first downs, keeping drives alive. And that acts as that governor that we were talking about that keeps the scores proportional.
I notice that you have on the card, you note that they have a good pass defense. You also note that weakness is that the running game must surprise to be effective. How did you kind of work that in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in breakaway football, most teams have a 4 value run if they're effective on the ground. I'm pretty sure the Gunslingers don't, because the Gunslingers don't have a run-heavy formation. Unlike other teams that have a run-heavy, a balance, and a pass-heavy, the way that the values are distributed is only in balanced and pass-heavy. And it's just because of the formation limitations. That team didn't even have a tight end on the roster, I'm pretty sure. So they would just come out in three wide, four wide, and one back, and you just roll with it. So they don't have the capability to kind of load the line and challenge like a goal line set with the run. And so as a result, you really need to bait your opponent into overcommitting to the pass. And then you could run, and a 3-value run against a 0 run value zone is pretty devastating. That's a quick 15 yards plus whatever the game day deck might adjust. So that's how you end up getting high output without the high card values, because of the way that the playbook is constructed and sort of what the opponent needs to account for.
And you've designed, for those who might not have tuned in previously, Breakaway Football focuses on great teams from 1958 Colts to the present, and there is a team creator module that lets you card any team, including, we've mentioned, the 76 Buccaneers. When did you create the Gunslingers relative to some other pass-heavy teams, like some of the 2000s teams?
The Gunslingers are sort of earlier in our overall development. They may have been the 10th squad that we did, 9th or 10th, I want to say. What's interesting about just the history of the NFL is that the kinds of defenses that you would tend to see would have linebacker heavy sets, right? It was very rare that you'd have like a full dime at that point, although teams were starting to offer that as, a natural consequence of they're putting 4 receivers and my linebacker can't cover their slot receiver. My other linebacker can't cover their other slot. Like, this is madness. We got to put more guys on the field who can run. And so that's when you start getting a preponderance of that. In fact, I want to say that the Oilers of 92 had a set called Monster, and that was their dime look. Yeah, I kind of remember that. But anyway, it was still, I wouldn't say in its infancy, but people were still figuring out what's the best approach to kind of keep this in check. But, a lot of teams that weren't able to adjust from a personnel standpoint are still trying to sort of cover the field. Even if they're playing zone, they have linebackers in these sort of underneath zones. Ernest Givens is going to chew them up, right? Curtis Duncan is going to chew them up. And so that's why they're able to get these cheap, easy yards and move the ball down the field so easily, because a lot of the defenses they were going up against weren't equipped to handle their personnel. That changed, once free agency hit and you could really start to craft the kind of secondary that you needed and go out and get pieces off the shelf, to make the defense you wanted. It became a lot easier to manage that. And so if we fast forward to the 99 Rams, we developed they're called the Bighorns. That is the true greatest show on turf, because their statistical output was insane, and they won a Super Bowl. So they get the title because they won the Super Bowl. But yeah, that team had 3 formations, because that team didn't abandon the run to just throw and sort of use the run as a change of pace surprise. That Rams team actually would load up a couple tight ends and a fullback and run Marshall Faulk into the middle of a line and make you honor every potential kind of play. And so that's how we handled that.
Just as the NFL is learning, game companies were learning. APBA, I've got my APBA Houston Oilers here. And if you just look through the key players here, you're going to see a bunch of A-grade receivers out of ABC. So that gives you a passing boost. And, there's a keying element to the game where you can guess what receiver is going to get the ball. And when you've got 4 A-grade receivers, including a running back, it's almost rendered ineffective. You now are in the shoes of, what am I looking at here? Okay. APBA was pretty prescient, when in 1982 they started tracking sacks. They added an allocation code so that you could roll to determine who got the sack if you want to be statistically accurate. And you can do that with the receivers as well. They also institute a bonus for 3 wide receivers on the field. You move higher on the results charts where there are longer gains, but the defense can throw in that dime back you mentioned and negate that 2-line adjustment. There's also a blitz where you're in a light line setting and you could add a couple more lines of a drop, but it's really tricky. And when you've got a single back like Lorenzo White, you might take that negative adjustment, even though you're in a 3 or 4 wide set, and get the yardage that way. And one of the things that APBA players started having to do is the game rules stopped at a 3 wide receiver set. So what do you do with these Oilers on a 4 wide receiver set? Some argue that you just play it as a base set, and that's no adjustments. That's their basic offense. Some say, well, what if we make it a 3-line adjustment instead of a 2-line adjustment? So that speaks to trying to amp up the results and kind of capture more of the character that you're capturing here without skewing the results. And to be clear, breakaway football is based on the statistics. So you've done countless hours of game film research. You've held numerous tournaments. How many folks pick the Gunslingers? And when they do that, how do you kind of reconcile yourself to the fact that you're picking a team that can hurt itself so often?
Yeah. So it has been selected at least twice in 5 tournaments. So it is not an unattractive team. I think if you're an Oilers fan, it's more attractive, right? Just like the Sentinels, based on the 91 Saints, is more attractive if you're a Saints fan. But they are, I think, a very faithful and accurate representation of what that team could do, because they really can own, in breakaway football, they can own the first half, just dominate the first half. And then the second half, because of their here we go again mechanism, fall prey to bad luck and just bad bounces the ball, or and that's kind of how we abstracted the effects of injury, fatigue, and just bad luck was into this here we go again. There are 4 little bullets, because they're the gunslingers and they shoot themselves in the foot, so it's 4 bullets that you put on the card, and it only matters when the Gunslingers are winning in the second half. So it does not apply in the first half at all, and it doesn't apply in the second half if they are losing. So the team is very strong out of the box, and it can maintain its strength in deep into the game as long as they're not winning. So some of the strategies are around actually colluding with your opponent to stay either even or just behind your opponent, and be in that game late and have that last possession, score that go ahead score to win the game that way, instead of racing to a big lead and then holding on for dear life in the second half as your opponent gets all of these different bullets. But the bullets are extra game day card pulls. So it explains how you can have Don Beebe run out of bounds and then back in bounds and catch the ball and get a touchdown, and the refs don't notice it, because it's like, what's happening here? Oh, well, I used a bullet and I get a better game day card. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. But once, let's say that I have all 4 bullets and I use one and I go ahead and score the tying score. So now it's 31-31 in the fourth quarter. Well, all of those bullets that I've accrued as the opponent of the Gunslingers, they all go away. Just because we harvested them doesn't mean we get to use them, because the conditions aren't right. It's one of those things where we don't want to penalize the Gunslingers because of history. We just want to help the game play out the way it would historically play out, which is these really narrowly hard-fought, contested, narrow kind of victories or defeats. And so the design really reinforces that sensibility.
Since this is a design challenge of sorts, I went ahead and whipped up a couple things. I didn't want to completely pop your style there, but I did whip up a couple of my APBA style cards.
Nice.
The Fab Four will get you with limited usage, letting them use it 4 times in the game. Keeping in spirit with APBA, they let you use 4 audibles in the game, so you can reverse some incomplete passes.
That's great.
Medium and long. So, yeah. Maybe, and again, this is just like your game is ideal for. You can grab 2 teams, really great teams, iconic teams, not just great, iconic, known, named teams, and go to town and really feel, because that's what you want. You don't want the 3-6 slugfest. You want, what Arthur's bringing here. And then on defense, I did something called an oil spill, where I've got a couple things where, and now I would give this maybe to the defensive coach, where you've got a 4 or 5 rated point defensive captain who can undo some big games for the Oilers. Then there's another version of it where I really drill down to a few uses for the game, where you have some just negative outcomes. When Houston's leading in the third or fourth quarter, you might roll it one on each play of Houston's drives, or maybe have a third die as a 50-50 trigger that would lead you to a 2 or 12 die roll, and then you'd have another roll. So you just keep drilling down to some infinitesimal possibilities.
Yeah.
To, offense automatically offsides, or a bobbled ball loses 5 yards off the play, or some player is tired, you roll on the position chart and that person's out for play or two, which does speak to kind of injury fatigue. So, there are kind of ways to kind of have fun with APBA football, which is more geared to statistically pure seasonal replays. Of the 90 to 93 Bills, have you carded any of those?
Yeah, they're called the Minotaurs, and it's the 1990 Bills, the ones who lost to the Giants in that heartbreaker. They have a mechanism called wide right, which unfortunately makes it a little harder for them to make a late game kick. Again, because history proved that that's what the case was. It's really tough, though. We don't want to be so prescriptive that a team feels like it's on the rails and that you're really just along for the ride. It's a small world and you can't really affect the outcome. So we want things that have the flavor of history. And we want things that are proportionately strong, that they don't put their thumb on the scale too hard or not hard enough for a team, so that, you can have these real kind of battles of, like, I'd love to play the Gunslingers against the Cardiacs. That's the 92 Oilers against the 1980 Browns. I think that would be a heck of a game, because both of those teams rely on being losing late. And so it would almost be, after you, no, after you, after you, like it would be one of those games. But I think it would be, a nail biter down to the last drive, and it would be really exciting to see that. So that's really what we're trying to go for. And, if the design is done well, then the mechanisms don't put their thumb on the scale so hard that you feel like the outcome is always, going to be the same. Because you're really trying to emphasize your coaching. The quality of the play calling should be the primary differentiator. But within that, like if you just empirically look at two different rosters and sort of how they did, this Oilers team is not going to stack up to, say, the 15-1 Vikings from 1998, or the Steelers of 78, or the Dolphins of 72, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you take those different teams and match them up, you come into it knowing, okay, the Oilers are already kind of behind the curve here. Plus, they have this mechanism that makes it hard for them to hold a lead. So, all right, got to bow up. It's going to be a long day. So, yeah, I mean, you can have the experience that you want based on the teams that you match up.
Now, I mentioned Team Creator, and that allows anyone to card a team based on, you've got access to the stats. There are more stats every day. I would just be curious if someone wanted to card, say, I think it was the 90 or 91 Oilers, where two of the receivers had 1,000 yards and Moon had like 4,300 yards passing, or any iteration from 87 to 93, excluding 92. How might that change this Gunslingers card? To the extent that you might or might not have done research into those.
No, that's a great question. I think just on the surface of it, Warren Moon was able to scramble, and one of the things I noticed was that he, like early in that year in 92, he was able to scramble. We didn't account for that at all because he was injured for part of the year. It wasn't a big part of his game. And we try to limit the number of mechanisms to a manageable, really, it's more like 2, 3, at the max 4. And Team Creator has guidance. It's not just sort of, well, however many you want. It has a rigor around, well, how well did the team perform in the season, and that's how many mechanisms you get. If a team made the playoffs, for example, they get a mechanism. If they won their conference championship, they get one. If they won the Super Bowl, they get one. So there's a list of how that works. And if you take a poison pill, they get an extra one. So you can add mechanisms, within this framework. But I think, back to your question of, you've got a different Oilers team that has a couple 1,000-yard receivers, just a different makeup. The playbook construction is going to be a little different. The values that you have on the cards, there's a lot of rigor around that. You're going to take the actual statistics, plug it into the formulas that we have in the book, and it will give you the number of offensive pass points, defensive pass points, offensive run points, defensive run points, and you'll be able to distribute that across your playbook the way that you see fit. So it doesn't have to look the same. It could be different. Also, because that team didn't blow a 32-point lead in the playoffs, maybe their version of Here We Go Again only has 2 bullets instead of 4. So I would say, the way that we approach the design of any team is to watch a ton of game film, and also the different packages that were put together by NFL Films and whomever, to really try to get a sense of the personality of the team. What were they good at? What were they known for? What were they bad at? Be faithful and authentic about making notes on that, and then think about how much did this really impact the end result of a game. And that's where I say, okay, yes, Boone was able to scramble on occasion, but it wasn't a huge part of their identity, so we're just going to leave it out. Whereas, oh wow, they played really close games and sometimes they blew leads. We kind of need to represent that.
One of the great things about Breakaway, one of the many great things, is that your teams are essentially normalized. You can play the 58 Colts against the 99 Rams, against the 2013 whoever, Seahawks.
Yeah.
Do you take strength of schedule into account at all in your calculations? Because this, again, we talked about this 92 Oilers team. They didn't have the strongest schedule outside of the Steelers. They did shut out the Chargers, who won the AFC West 11-5, and the Houston beat them 27-0. So another kind of anomalous outcome. But
Yeah, I do in the ones that are published. Now, Team Creator does not take strength of schedule into account. What it does instead is it takes the age that they're part of. We break the NFL into four distinct ages: the age of defense, the age of offense, the age of parity, and the age of passing. And those are, 58 to 77 and 78 to 94. It tells you what it is. But it's those major seismic shifts, and usually it's rule changes that kind of change the game of football. So 78, the Mel Blount rule, that fundamentally changed the way passes could be defended. And it had huge impacts because now you see all these guys breaking ring of Fouts and Marino breaking passing records every year. And you're like, why is that? Like, Roger Staubach's a really good quarterback. Why wasn't he doing it in the 70s? Because he was, the rules are different. We don't take strength of schedule into account in Team Creator, but I do when I'm publishing a real team. Good case there is actually the Bighorns, the 99 Rams, had a terrible strength of schedule, right? And so they rolled, but a lot of their opponents just weren't very good. It's not their fault. They just played a bunch of teams that weren't very good. So their run defense on paper looks amazing. But when you look at who they played, they never really played anybody. And then when they did play somebody who had a real running back, they got chewed up. So it's like, okay, well, I'm going to kind of tilt this a little bit so that it's not as strong as the stats are, but I'm not going to shortchange them. I'll actually give them a little extra over here. So we kind of flex that a little bit just to make sure that, the conceit is if the 99 Rams play against the 84 49ers, for example, Roger Craig's getting more than 85 yards against that team. But the thing that was so interesting about that team is that they could return turnovers. They were really, really good. I think Grant Wistrom had one return for touchdown, and Todd Light had at least one, maybe two. So like that's their identity, is if their defense creates a turnover, they can take it to the house. So they have that. And it's more about, let's just express the personality and let's not worry so much about strength of schedule and things like that. But I do take it into account to try to make sure that they're going to play appropriately against the legends of football.
Back to Team Creator, because and combine the idea of nuancing teams, massaging them year to year. Have you thought about or tried a fictional team, from Origins?
Yeah, I have not, but we included a subset of Team Creator specifically for people who did not want to tether their team to history. If they just wanted to create, the Boston Barnstormers, right? And here we go. There are rules on like what quality of team are you trying to create? Is it a bad team, an average team, a good team, an elite team? And so you can make the decisions, and then you just roll some dice to create the point totals that you need, and then you just follow the process normally. So you don't need to tether yourself to history in order to create a team that can be fun, and that way you don't have to worry so much about reflecting the personality of a specific squad. You can just go through the laundry list of potential mechanisms and go, oh, I like this one. I like this one. Almost like you're buying things off of eBay or picking things off a menu, and then create a team that has the personality that you want it to have. Yeah.
The 92 Oilers, or the Gunslingers. Where can people find these here Gunslingers?
The best place to go would be the GameCrafter website. And actually, all of the teams for Breakaway Football that have been published have their own video. And so you can watch anywhere from 7 to as much as 13 or 14 minutes. But I think the Gunslingers are probably around 7 to 9 minutes in length. And it shows you the deck construction, the different formations, and then the mechanisms and how they work. So you can get a sense of how that works before you decide to pull the trigger.
Throw a
See what I
link.
did there? Gunslingers. Totally.
Look at that. See, this is the mind of the designer. It just comes together. It's firing on all cylinders, as it were. And I'll put a link to the APBA Stadium shop. I can't recall offhand if the 92 season is back in stock, but no matter what game you choose, saddle them up and take them for a ride. It's a really cool hobby. And Breakaway is doing some really intense things that probably more familiar to gamers who are using more contemporary, colorful games, kind of playing hexes and reverses and things like that on folks. And but as we say, you can also incorporate some of that into APBA Football or Stratomatic, some of the more numbers aesthetic games. So Arthur, thank you. It's always a pleasure. We learn something new every time.
Thanks, Jeff. This is a lot of fun.